Hi. Hey, how's it going, everyone? Great. Thank you so much for coming out this Sunday afternoon. It's so nice to be in front of live audiences again. My name is Nikesh Shukla. I am a writer and uh, the chair of this event. And as you can tell, I've been after a year and a half of doing lots and lots of Zoom events. I still haven't quite figured out how to be in front of people yet. So excuse the awkwardness. But you're obviously not here to see me. You're here to see the amazing Rabina Khan and Anita Rani in conversation, talking about being a South Asian woman in Britain today. But just before I bring them on, I just wanted to say just wanted to adjust my microphone. I think that's better. I just want to say thank you, really, just from the three of us, because I know, like, as things open up again and people are making choices about what they want to see and what they want to commit to, like, making the choice to come and see us just means the world to me personally. There are so many things you could have gone and seen, but you're here, and that's really, really lovely. So, without further ado. Can you tell it's been a while? Without any more delay, please, will you give a Sunday night Glastonbury main stage style welcome to Anita, Rani and Rabina Khan?
This is nice. Cosy.
Thank you.
Intimate. Thanks, Nikesh.
Hey,
Yeah, that was nice.
how you doing?
Great. This
How
is
you
lovely.
I'm well, thank you. Left all the kids at home.
So we are here to talk about memoir. Anita has this year, on my 41st birthday no less, put out her first memoir, The Right Sort of Girl, and Rabina Khan put out her memoir this year. My hair is pink under this veil. I don't know what the date it came out, but it was quite recently as well.
It was. Just May, June time.
Yeah.
So, yes.
So we're going to be talking about your memoirs and why you felt now was the time to tell these stories. But first, how are you both? How have your pandemics been? What has been the thing that you've done in the last couple of months that you've been really, really excited to do all through lockdown, and you've managed to do it and thought, that wasn't as good as I remembered? Or not? Ravina?
Gosh, that's a really hard question and an easy question as well at that moment. I think it's I've got older children. I've got two older daughters. And so what I've learnt from them is a whole heap of new generation modelling and new fashion and new makeup. And that COVID period, they taught me a lot about bronze and contouring. And it's like, I was thinking, I didn't have all of this. You know, growing up in the mid-1970s, I didn't have any of this contouring and all of this makeup that was suitable for brown skin. I had makeup that was suitable for a lot of white skin, and I couldn't adjust to all of that. And so having that moment with my daughters, I thought it was really good, fantastic, very, very, very connecting. And you learnt a lot, just as I learnt from my mum, I learnt from my daughters. And I think they learnt from me. They realised I needed a bit of a makeup lift, I think, from that generation.
Yeah, that contouring stuff, that Instagram contouring is so... You can't wear that makeup in real life, though, can you? Can that amount of... Nikesh, I know you've tried, but it's not...
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you look great.
Yeah, thanks.
Cheekbones there.
Yeah. I have not been doing any contouring, although I do like a bit of contouring. I've been watching quite a few Instagram tutorials. My dog, you know, I'm pretty much, I feel like I'm the first person ever to have got a dog in the history of and I'm just dog mad. 3.2 million people got puppies through lockdown, and I think if you want to make money now, go into doggy daycare. So my dog has kept me very busy. I've just been non-stop. It's just nice to sit down, actually. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I mean, for both of you, I guess for Anita, a lot of your job involves travelling around the country, and for you, being in the community is such an important part of what you do on a day-to-day basis. How did you kind of readjust yourselves last year to, I'm not going to say the new normal, but to what was going on?
Oh my God! To try and get from come out of lockdown, you mean, to
Or
kind of readjust?
yeah.
I'm finding it really strange, actually. It was weird going into lockdown, but it was funny how quickly I adapted to not having to go anywhere. My bag was packed. On the day we went into lockdown, I was due to fly to India. I don't know why I'm telling you this story. It breaks my heart every time I have to say it out loud. I was going to do a 4-part series called The Ganges with Anita, Rani. Oh, it's so painful. But it doesn't matter, you know. And I just thought, how am I going to sit still? I'm so used to being out and about, but actually I adapted. And, you know, those of us who were in our homes, we were safe. We weren't on the front line. We weren't, you know, having to go out there and face it for what it is. Actually, just kind of, had quite a nice time coming back to reality. I don't know, I can't remember. I'm back working as hard as I did before, but I can't remember how we did it. Like, how did we work to, like, just still feel like I'm still trying to catch up with myself. But I had a nice time writing this through lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you, Rabina? Because you know, being a counsellor, one of the things that you do, you're in the community. You know, making sure that it's functioning as it should. And how did you find you were able to do that through lockdown?
For me, because I was on the front line, and every day I had to go out and meet people, make sure people were safe. And whilst it was stay at home, you still had to make sure people could get things, just to make sure people had food parcels, and children were protected and children were supported. And in Tower Hamlets, just as we've seen across the country, people lived in very overcrowded situation, intergenerational families, and they needed that support. And one of the most striking things that I found is that the NHS, the London hospital, is just up my road, and the way in which people lifted each other, that was so heartwarming. And it just reminded me how very proud I was to be British, but to be Bangladeshi, to be Muslim. I saw people from all walks of life coming together, whether they were Jewish or gay, or up the road where my great friend, this Catholic elderly man who lives, or just that feeling of realising that COVID does one thing in us. It brings out, and it's like any crisis, it either brings out the best in you or the worst in you. And we did see the worst when we saw empty shelves, but we also saw the magnificent of the human being as we were. And I think that is what I will take from COVID. And I will take the fact that when you felt alone, you were not alone. There were still people out there trying to be with you. And so, yeah, that's something that I'm reminded of so often.
You're right. I think community, I felt closer to my community in East London and Hackney through the lockdown period than I've ever done. We had WhatsApp groups up and down the street. My husband is on the WhatsApp groups. I'm not on the WhatsApp groups. But we've got a fig tree at the end of our street, and somebody picked all the fruit and turned it into jam for everyone, and knocked on everyone's door and gave every single person on the street a jar of jam.
Yeah.
How nice is that?
Shame it was fig jam, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. So Ravina, tell everyone about the memoir, about My Hair is Pink Under This Veil. Just set it up for us, and if you could do a short reading, that'd be great.
Oh, okay. So My Hair is Pink Under This Veil. The title comes from an interaction I had in 2015. I stood in a really volatile election in Tower Hamlets. And so this white man asked me what colour my hair was under my veil. So I said it was pink, but I didn't ask him what colour his hair was before he went bald. And so you know, you get these questions asked. And so I thought about that title and that interaction, and you get that kind of interaction. You get people asking about Asian women, and I'm a brown woman with a hijab, and I get all sorts of questions asked and all sorts of things that I've had to deal with. And I wrote when I had that interaction, I wrote an article in my Huffington Post blog, and then I went on to deliver a lecture at Cambridge University. And it was during the beginning of the lockdown. I wrote the first 3 chapters, and then began to write the rest of it, just like Anita had during COVID. But the book is really about my life when I came to the UK. I was born in Bangladesh. I came to the UK in 1975, and I lived in Rochester in Kent. I was the only child of colour on the street I lived on. And in fact, we were the only family of colour at the time in the street that we lived on. And it spans from the generation of me growing up in the mid-1970s to me finding myself through the 80s at school, from the moments that I permed my hair without telling my mum and used the scarf to hide the perm in the first place, so she couldn't figure out that I'd done all of that. And so it's a coming of age book, but it's also about what we look like as modern British Muslim women and an ancient modern British Muslim woman. You cannot generalise a Muslim woman. So the people who have felt really inclined who've touched my life has been my mother and my father. So there is a quick, you get to the age where you have to wear glasses now. So,
hey, some of us were
okay.
before it was fashionably age appropriate.
So I'll just read this snippet. When my mum was in charge, our Sunday roast chicken came out with red chilli, cardamom and a pinch of saffron. Absolutely delicious first generation Anglo-Bengali Sunday roast. My mother is British just as she is Bangladeshi and Muslim. In all honesty, I think she would struggle to make her home in Bangladesh if she ever moved back. She raised 5 children in Rochester at a time when there were very few Bangladeshi women living near her. There was no one to whom she could relate to. She was essentially alone, completely unfamiliar with the territory that she had come to call home. There were no support networks, and she had to adjust to new social norms all on her own. No matter how long you have lived in another country, you never lose your roots and values. My mum is a pensioner now, but we children still roll our eyes when she stares at other people who behave differently to what she is accustomed to. She doesn't understand the attraction of reality TV shows or young girls wearing high heels so high that they could break their ankles. She was horrified when she discovered one of her children had made her a TikTok viral video just because she was watching her favourite Indian soaps. My mother now has 14 grandchildren, all born in Britain, whom she loves and shares a connection with in different and unique ways. She combs their hair, encourages them to oil their skin until they glow, attempts to advise on fashion wear, tells them that grammar schools are the best, cooks Bengalish dishes and loves her Eid and Christmas get-together. What's not British about all of that?
Thank you so much for sharing that. And one of the things that I really loved about the memoir was it was so warm and open-hearted. I think it's something that both of your memoirs are. They're both very warm. They both have a very conversational tone. You know, you feel like you're listening to an old friend tell a story. Can you just tell us a little bit about the process of writing it and how you kind of captured your voice on the page?
I spoke to my mum at the beginning, and there's a chapter in there, and I recall some memories that I had, and it was talking to her the first 3 chapters. So one of the memories that I have of my mother in the 1970s, and it's a very painful memory, and it's a memory that I often see in my head often when I see something racist that has happened. I still recall my mother in the supermarket in the 1970s, and there were no halal food. And so when she stood in the supermarket queue, she used to be pushed out, and the shop assistant, supermarket assistants, used to put pork sausages in her trolley deliberately. And when we stood in the queue, I was little at the time, and my little sister was in the pushchair, and my brother was there as well. And I still recall an incident in which we stood in the supermarket, and she kept asking for eggs, and they wouldn't give her the eggs. And they kept asking, and she kept asking, and it was this belittling attitude. And eventually, the assistant let her have the eggs, but even then, she had to stand in the queue for ages. And when we eventually went to pay for it, the woman attempted to say made this allegation that she may have shoplifted, and which wasn't true. So eventually, we left the supermarket. But that effect really affected me as I walked out. I was about 8 or 9, and I grabbed the eggs from her handbag and from the shopping bag, and I went back into the supermarket and I smashed one of the eggs on the cashier, and I said, "That's your change." And I think that kind of impulse to write it.
Such a
Woo,
gang.
woo.
Yeah, and you know,
At 8, you were 8 years old.
8, 9 years old, and I still remember it. And there are these things that stay with you, and as they will with you, Anita, growing up, and you, Nikesh, but those little elements that remain even as we grew up in Rochester in Kent, where Charles Dickens' famous town. And as you walk along the high street, there was a bakery. My father, every Saturday, used to take us along there to the library. And we stood outside the bakery, and there was a particular bakery which we loved, the donuts. We wanted those donuts. They were delicious. But as brown children, we had to wait outside. And my father used to go in. He was only allowed to go in. But the white little children could go in with their parents. And we used to watch. And this is early 80s.
Sounds Dickensian.
Yes, exactly. And I had the jelly sandals at the time. I thought I could be part of it all. And that glimpse of like smudging your nose against the window and the bakery woman just shouting at you. And that's white privilege. It's racism, but it's also white privilege. And that kind of thing stays with you, but it makes you stronger. And it makes you take responsibility and be proud of what you have, your identity of being proud.
It's always interesting when you hear stories like that, and obviously, like, you know, we were like, yeah, you go gangster and all the rest of it, but like when you boil it down to what has actually happened, and you think, what has that 8-year-old Rabina internalized? Like,
Yeah.
it's like it's a hero's story, but it's also like an absolutely horrible story. Like, just last week I was having dinner. Sorry, this is just as an aside, but you just made me think of it. Last week, I was having, or 2 weeks ago, I was having dinner with my father outside a restaurant, and someone was shouting racist slurs at someone else, and I just sort of walked along the sort of the contours of the outside bit of the restaurant to kind of make sure this guy was okay, and that's when the guy took an interest in me and my dad and ran over and started like, basically like reaching over to try and punch my father. And I ended up like pushing him off because he was about to attack my dad. And when I told that story later on, like, people were like, "Wow, that's so like you're a hero" and all the rest of it. And I was like, "That's like a really sad story."
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's horrendous.
And like even now, like in my 40s, you're like, and what you internalize these stories, and then you kind of then present them to people as a way of showing them that, you know, like, you know, when we tell these stories and people go, yes, I know, I can relate, that has happened to me. And you just think there are so many traumatized children out there because they've dealt with all this stuff. Because in that moment, I was like a child defending, you know, that I felt that emotion that you felt when you threw the egg. Sorry, that was just an aside, but it's my truth, man. I'm just going to speak it.
Yeah.
Anita, Rani,
Yes.
we've known each other for a while.
We have, yeah. When you were a rapper.
And yet I did not appear in your memoir, which was bit upsetting.
Your name is on the front cover. It literally says Nikesh Shukla on the front cover.
I'm joking. Can you set up the memoir and why you wrote it, and then read us a short?
Yeah, no, with pleasure. So we never saw ourselves reflected in anything growing up. Our story was nowhere. I never saw any Asian women on telly, never in any magazines. I definitely never read a book that I could relate to and think, oh no, Bargee on the Beach, which came out 30 years ago, which still to this day is so brilliant, and everything in it is still relevant just as much today as it was 30 years ago. But really, since then, there's been nothing that's made me go, oh my God, that's I see myself. And so I find myself being somewhere no Asian woman has gone before. I'm in the countryside on a Sunday night on BBC One in Wellies, and I thought, you know, okay, so I'm here, I'm in this space, but actually I come with a tale and I come with a story that is really important for people to understand. And what I recognised, having made a programme about partition and various other programmes that I've made about what it means to be Asian, how little people really understand about about British history, about colonialism, about why communities are here, and our experience. Like, people don't know. You might be mates with somebody and actually they literally know nothing about you or your neighbours. So anyway, I wrote a book about my life growing up here. I thought it was just going to be a childhood memoir, But it actually is about how, because I get asked this question a lot, how did you get to where you are as an Asian woman, as an Asian woman from Bradford? And so I thought, right, I'll tell you. But
With the implication that no Asian woman from Bradford should be here.
yeah, why, how, and what are you doing here? Sometimes it feels like that, but, you know, we battle on. I had to tell, if I was going to tell my story, I had to tell the story of my grandparents as well. So I start by explaining how my family arrived here in the 50s, you know, and explaining that my grandfather was invited here. And I also talk about lots of different things, but I also talk about partition, because I've recognised that we've got to understand our ancestry to fully understand who we are, especially as women. And it was really important for me to honour the story of Asian women in this book. And actually, when I started writing it, it was their stories that I found myself really connecting to my gran and connecting to my mum, even though I've spent a lifetime thinking, I definitely don't want to be like these women, because they have no choice and they just looked like subservient women who had to just get on with whatever terrible cards life had dealt them. And then through writing this book, I realised, no, they are the warriors and they're the heroes of my tale. So, yeah, but hopefully I make people laugh as well. Shall I read you some of it? Shall I read you something?
Yes, please.
So many bits. Which bit shall I tell you about? Okay, so my parents in the 80s, like lots of South Asian families, particularly up north, went into manufacturing in the rag trade because, you know, manufacturing was easy to get into. You could set up a business, and very entrepreneurial spirit. So my parents had a factory, and lots of Asian women used to sew for them, both from the Bangladeshi community, the Pakistani community, the Indian community, and the white British community. And my dad was very adventurous. Like, he'd take us out to the countryside every weekend. We'd be in the moors. Every so often, Dad's adventurous spirit would extend to his workforce, and they'd organise factory outings to the seaside. The summer of '86, Dad hired a big old coach to take all the women who sewed in the factory, and even a couple of the women who sewed from home, on a day trip to Rhyl. Women who really were not allowed to leave their front door without a male family member. The furthest they'd ever been was a trip to Manningham Park, not even into the town centre. Yet somehow their families had enough trust and respect for my young parents to let them join us on the adventure to the Welsh seaside. My mum is incredibly persuasive. All the women were invited. Plus, they were told they could bring other family members too: mothers, cousins, aunts, sisters-in-law, and of course their young children. The only rule my mum had set out was no men were allowed. The only two men on the trip, apart from the bus driver, were my dad and my younger brother. Watch out, Wales. They all piled onto the bus. Jagiro auntie, Rampyari auntie, Azra auntie, Praveen auntie, Satto auntie, Shamim auntie, Shakila auntie, Sarjit auntie. Mum had bought boxes of food for everyone to share on the coach. Samosas, bananas, plums, packets of crisps. Buying in boxes is not strange. There are certain things that can only be bought in big boxes in large quantities. Lychees, cherries, onions, they come in giant sacks, and mangoes. One mango wouldn't even touch the sides. And samosas, if you're going on a coach trip. It was a sweltering day in June, and the air on the coach was fizzing with excitement and a mild aroma of puke. It didn't take long for the heady mix of freedom, a bumpy coach, and the samosa-banana combination to take its first victim. Sarabjit auntie vomited into a Morrison's plastic bag. Asian women are always able to produce a Morrison's carrier bag at any moment. Producing carrier bags and singing folk songs are their fortes. The soundtrack of voices of varying standards and pitches singing Punjabi Bulia as loud as they could accompanied us all the way to Wales. When we arrived, the only instruction was to be back at the coach by 5 p.m. Other than that, Dad said they should go and enjoy themselves. On that glorious sunny day in June, on the beach in Rhyl, amongst the children building sandcastles and the women sunbathing in bikinis, a group of women, never before seen in this part of the world, approached the sea for the very first time, daring each other to touch it, the sea beckoning them towards it, so they approached, teasing each other, giggling like girls, playing like children, their worries left behind in a house in Bradford. They rolled up their shalwars, aware that they were revealing the bottom half of their calves and ankles, enjoying the feeling of danger and freedom and safety in numbers. Like a symbolic ritual, they stepped into the Irish Sea, looking out to the horizon for the first time in their lives, feeling peace and joy, letting the waves wash away the sadness, letting the breeze carry away their pain. And then Shamim Auntie slipped. Now there was a full-on wet Silvarkamise situation. But with no husbands, brothers, uncles or cousins around, the women just howled with laughter. They thanked Mum and Dad and said, "Today you've shown us a new country." I have such deep respect for these women, the linchpins of their families, struggling in a land that's not their own, sometimes with husbands who have no respect for them, some of them quiet, some of them vocal, but all of them warriors, selfless warriors, and the most powerful forces I know. Time and time again, they take a battering from life, and every time they rise. They should be treated with the respect and admiration they deserve. We, their children and grandchildren, should recognise their greatness, and daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters should see that we are born of these warriors, and we owe it to them to own our narrative. So there's a lot about moving between different worlds growing up as a Punjabi girl in Britain, and how actually for me, the conflict started from a very young age, trying to figure out the world around me and the sort of patriarchal system I was born into, before I even stepped out into the wider world and figured out that no one's going to see me how I see myself. Before I'd even got there, I had to figure out how to do that within my own family.
So I teach creative writing, and one of the things that I do with young writers is I always get them to define who their intended reader is, because I think it's so easy for writers to just write without thinking who this matters to. And I wondered if you had Rabina, when you were writing this, who was your intended reader? Who did you want to read this, and what did you want to sort of inspire or change about the way they saw the world? What did you have a manifesto for this intended reader?
Yes, the intended reader are the people who don't know Muslim Asian women. I wanted to reach out to them and tell them that post 9/11, where you had this narrative about Muslim women being submissive, being oppressed, and obviously post 9/11, what happened was the Muslim community were demonized, but they withdrew in themselves. And I do have to say and pay tribute to the Sikh community, because post 9/11, the very first person who had a revenge attack was a Sikh man in America. And people all over came together again. But this book is to tell people that a Muslim woman isn't just a woman who wears a hijab. We are GPs, we are doctors, we are lawyers, we are politicians, we are campaigners, we are actors, we are boxers. We are everything that you may think that we are not. And it is about the shape of our narrative that has been delivered and narrated by policymakers and lawmakers, from people who gave us fashion tips on the way, and to politicians who wanted to wrap a narrative around us. It is about us taking our narrative back to tell us our story. And in this book, there's a chapter here which actually looks about the way in which the British Muslim woman has taken, the Asian British Muslim woman has taken hijab and manifested it into a fashion industry. So we've taken that, and it's the grassroots movement of young women who have come of age, who have really taken that stereotype of the hijab and wrapped it into a fashion industry. I mean, to date, the fashion industry, modest fashion and the hijab, I think it's the value of about $300 billion worldwide, and it's just growing. And I can tell you, in the ward that I'm elected for, I have 3 young constituents, and they are fashion bloggers, and one of them has over 500,000 followers on her Instagram page. And that shows to me that the redefinition of Muslim women is coming about, and that I don't need a prime minister or a politician to tell people that I'm a bank robber or anything else. I have my story to tell, and I intended that story to be told to people who may not necessarily have interacted with Muslim women. And I remind myself of the 1970s when I came to the UK. There was no mosque. There was no access to the halal butchers. We see it now, but yet there are parts of the UK where people have not interacted with Muslim women, and the stereotypes that we often see are there. So this is a redefinition of young Muslim women and Muslim women modern British Muslim women. So that's what I think.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And it feels like for the right sort of girl for your memoir, you had had a different reader in mind.
Yeah, I had a 16-year-old me, which is South Asian women pretty much. I mean, it's for everybody. And I found myself, like I do for my day job, kind of explaining something that's quite particular, but for a wider audience. So I had everyone in mind, but actually I've written it for the little Asian girl who just doesn't see her story reflected anywhere, but also is living within different worlds. And the reality is, yeah, it's hard. You step out and you dial a certain aspect of yourself down to fit in. But then the minute you're in the home, you become somebody else. And actually, and we just have to fit in with huge expectations on us about doing the right thing as a young woman, and how actually you find that the boys are treated very differently. And certainly as the eldest daughter in my family, there was a lot of you carry the pride and the shame of your family. So I wanted to sort of talk about that. And I think sometimes when people see that you are successful or that you have a position of some kind of privilege, that people think you come from a privileged background. And it was really important for me to say to people that it's as much about class as it is about race. To explain that actually I just come from a really mad family. Really noisy, shouty Punjabi family. And actually the reaction it's been great, because those women are getting in touch with me to say, yeah, we feel seen.
And when you were writing these books, how did you keep those people in mind? How did you keep in your mind the people whose minds you wanted to change or to expand, or and to dispel these myths for them? And how did you keep that 16-year-old you in mind? Was it? Did you have to keep coming back to that, or did it just come out quite naturally?
I looked at my daughters to see what they could see. And Anita is right, in those days when we went to school, we never saw books or pictures. I never saw someone who looked like me in a book. The nearest that I came across, I looked like Pocahontas. And everybody asked me if I was from India. And this stereotype of the teacher saying to me, and it's in the book, that she kept saying to me, yes, you're from India. And I said, no, I'm from Bangladesh. It's a completely different country. And it's like, no, you're from India. And she just kept putting me down as, there was a box, Indian. And I was like, no, the partition has actually happened. I'm Bangladesh. And 1971, we had a civil liberation war, and I am Bangladeshi. And so when I think of seeing someone like myself, and the books that I read, Janet and John, they had blonde hair, blue eyes, and that's all I ever read about. And the closest I came across was Pocahontas, and I was desperate to play Pocahontas in the school play, so I ended up playing this play, and I had my parents who came to see me, and I'm sure you've been in this position where you've got someone who really fancies you in the classroom and desperate to kiss you, and you've got your parents are staring at you in the middle of this assembly, and I'm like thinking, no, don't kiss me now, not in front of my parents.
Oh my God, the ultimate humiliation.
Yes.
Oh my God.
and it's like, no, don't do that. And I was desperate to play Pocahontas, and I just didn't want this kissing bit in the middle of it all. And so...
Was there a kissing scene in your school play?
Yeah, well, there was. I think that this boy did it deliberately because he just wanted to give me a peck on the cheek, and I was like, no. And Pocahontas dies in the play, and I'm just lying down there thinking, no, you can't do this, not in front of Asian parents. I'm going to go home. I have to explain all this to them. So when I think of all of this, all of those poignant moments, you reflect on it when you look at your children, your nephews, your nieces, when you see the young people now, and you think what was then and what is now, and how far we have come in our lives.
What about you, Anita?
Because I was writing it, it starts with a letter to myself and it ends with a letter to me. So I'm writing it to me, and for me it was, see, when you set out to write a letter to your 16-year-old self, you can't lie, because she's living it. She's up there in Bradford, confused and, looking out in suburban Bradford thinking, when the hell can I get out of here? And so that really kept me on the straight and narrow, in that I have to be really honest. There's lots I didn't put in there, but what's in there is the truth. And, I had a similar dilemma about who for me, it was, who on earth could I be on Stars in Their Eyes? Tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be who?
Jasmine.
Yeah, Jasmine. Betty Boo. Or I always used to think Sade, because who else? She had a big long... she tied her hair back. Anyway, what was the question? Oh, yeah. So I, because... And that's how I kept it to the audience. And just, kept thinking about writing it to myself.
Yeah, what I really love about both of these books is how accessible and they strive to be. And when we talk about representation on screen, or in the books we read, we often there's often that thing about the danger of the single story, where where a majority white industry platforms one person to tell their story, and that becomes the story of all of us, and somehow we all have to kind of fit into that. There were years of, like, when I was trying to get a sitcom made, and people were like, but
we've got the brand story.
Citizen Khan is on, and I was like, yes, but there can be more than one.
We're like the Highlander.
And which then often pits people against each other. But what it can often do is force, when we feel that responsibility that ours might be the single story, we then feel a responsibility to represent an entire community. And one of the things that I always worry about is that it then doesn't allow for these stories to be complex or nuanced, or for us to tell stories of when we might have been less than our best selves, or so on and so forth. And I wondered if you wrestled with any of that when you were writing this. We'll start with you, Anita.
No, I didn't think I was writing this to reflect everyone's experience. It was really, this is my life and this is my story, and it's very raw and it's very real. I cried a lot in there and I laughed a lot, but I also knew, and I know it's not representing anyone, but it is a story that lots of people will be able to relate to. And it is a story that I feel like these are conversations or things that we have known growing up always, certainly Asian women, and just no one's ever said it out loud. Just no one said, this is like, I went to a very white school, and I talk about periods in the book. Like 16-year-old me wouldn't believe that I've written a book where I've exposed my dirty pants, But it was really important because I've read books about kind of coming of age stories, and it's like, oh yes, and then I had my period and it was great, and I had this conversation with my mum. I'm like, my mum never had a conversation with me. I would stand around on the periphery of groups of girls talking about, puberty, and for me, even Just 17 was like, oh my God, like I'm reading Just 17, and the idea of having a boyfriend. So it was like I had to explain that we sort of were, our stories on the edge, and we're in the corners, and it slips through the middle, and no one's ever sort of explained that. So I've tried to be as nuanced as possible, and the only way I could do it was be really specific about my experience and not generalise.
What about you, Rabina?
Yeah, no, I agree with Anita, because I think we all have our experiences and they are very unique to ourselves. Just because you've written a book doesn't mean that, or I've written a book, it doesn't reflect every single Asian person. And there are things that affect us in different ways, from the way we might have something, buying a dress. And when I sometimes think that I was desperate to have this spiral perm, that I was, Culture Club, they played an enormous amount of influence in my life, Duran Duran and the Bangles. And I skipped school, I bunked school to go and have this perm in Sharon's hairdressers, for God's sake, of all the places that I went to. And when you go in there, and I still remember lying to my parents, I wanted to, she took this hair out, all this long black hair, and said, no, Sharon said, no, darling, you're going to be here for 3 hours, maybe 4 hours. And in those days, ammonia. Yeah, and when she took it out, I looked like Medusa. And it was, and I looked in the mirror, and I still remember her saying, you look like that girl. You know that girl from the Tia Maria advert? That Tia Maria advert. I had no idea.
Tia Maria.
And I didn't know. Didn't know what it was. I was like, yeah, okay, but I don't know how I'm going to explain this to my parents. And so I went home and I used the veil because my dad, he wasn't really bothered about whether I wore the hijab or not. And my mum was trying to, keeping up appearances. Every Asian family has that keeping up appearances of putting a veil. So I had a scarf that I don't know, I think I wrapped it around my waist sometimes and walked around. And I went home and I wrapped this veil on my hair to hide it from my mum. And she kept wondering, oh God, she's become religious, like nun. I've become a nun. And it was only when she took the scarf off. And now when I look at my daughter, the oldest one, her hair is like auburn now, she's dyed it in different colours. And I look at it and think, I've done this, and now my daughter's doing this, and it's a generation. And I think every generation, whether they are a man or a woman or a person, and they have their own hair story. I'm sure you've all had a hair story to tell.
Yeah, there's literally a chapter dedicated to hair and hair removal.
Okay.
Really shocking story of my mum taking me to see her mate who'd never done a bikini wax before but decided to experiment on me. And I limped for quite a long time after that. But also cutting my hair for Sikh girls.
Yeah.
Your hair is, in like long, dark, luscious hair. And I used to have a plait that I used to be able to sit on, and I used to stand on the toilet with the mirror, like the bathroom cabinet, with a pair of scissors and just trim my hair in secret. And once I just went too far up, and that much hair just dropped onto the bathroom floor, and I thought, shit. Done it now. And that was absolute like my mum, they were just so angry with me, and I'd try and dye it purple, and I'd just have a purple hairline and purple ears, and then the promise was that as soon as I finished my A-levels I was allowed to cut my hair. So I went, Tony and Guy, the day I finished my last exam, chopped it off. Yeah.
One of the things that you've both mentioned here on stage, but also in the book, you talked about like a scarcity of visible South Asian women when you were growing up. And I want, it feels like there are so many exciting people doing interesting things at the moment. And I wondered if you could talk about who you feel are some really great role models for South Asian women that you're kind of seeing around at the moment that people should check out.
Oh, loads. I mean, obviously on telly. I tell you who I think is genuinely one of the most amazing women to have on TV, and just talk about representing hard, is Nadia Hussain. I think she is it's an overused phrase, but she's authentic. She is who she is, and she's just remarkable. So she's definitely someone. But actually, in various fields, like in music, which we love, there's some amazing women doing some really brilliant stuff. Nabia, she's doing stuff on Six Music, and
Nabia Iqbal.
Iqbal, thank you. And there's lots of young actresses, and Nida, what's Nida Mansour? Mahmood.
Nida Mansour.
Yeah, Mansour, the writer who wrote, what was the channel for?
Lady Parts.
Lady Parts. Did you see Lady Parts? So that was great. There's loads of young Asian women doing stuff. But, there's lots of women who are kind of visible out there doing things, like Nikita Gill, who's a poet online, and Rupi Kaur, who's also an amazing Punjabi woman. She's Canadian. And Lily Singh, who's got a show in America. There's loads of women out there doing stuff. But actually, we need women in the kind of positions of power making the decisions. So that's kind of what needs to change a bit more, Who are the gatekeepers who can make decisions? That's what needs to happen more of.
No, I agree with Anita. We've seen more and more role models as well. I think for me, when it comes to decision making, Baroness Marcy is a very, very crucial one as well to see. And all the MPs now we've seen in Parliament and leading on that. But I think every single Asian woman has a role to play and has a place at that decision making, whether they are in a high corporate company or whether they are in a school. And when I think of all of this representation, it's really odd. I'm actually thinking of Sabina Nessa, and the reason I'm thinking about her is I think of all the women of colour, Asian women who have travelled to get to a place, and she travelled to get to a place to become a teacher, to teach, and such a life that has been cut short. And in that way, I think of all the women who may not be here, who could have been here, whether they died as a result of domestic violence. Just recently, 3 months ago, the lady in Birmingham, now I wrote about her, now it's gone out my head, but murdered by her husband. All the women who cannot be here but should have been here, I am reminded of those women of colour who couldn't access a service, who were not represented at the police station, women I talk about in this book whose rights were taken away, who were forced into a marriage, who were killed for no reason of their own, whether it was to do with honour killings. And I think of those women, they should always be remembered, and they should be here with us, and we should remember them in celebration of the lives that they could have led, but in remembrance of them being here as well.
Thank you so much. So we're going to throw it out to you guys for questions in a second, but just a word of caution while you're thinking of your amazing question. I don't tolerate comments disguised as questions. If you start by saying it's less of a question, more of a comment, really.
Harsh.
I'm not going to be rude. I might be a bit passive aggressive. I'm just warning you, and I'm really sorry. But yes, if questions, we have you right in the middle there. I don't know if there's a microphone coming round. Oh, there is. So we'll go you in the middle, and then 2 rows back, and then we'll come to you with glasses there.
I wanted to know if your families read your books and how they responded to them.
Great question.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Rabina.
I had a book signing in the garden.
Oh,
nice.
With 14 of my mother's grandchildren, I had to sign every single book. I had to write a comment in each book, and then they went and compared who had the better comment. And so I had the book signing in there, and I had to translate everything that I mentioned about my mum to her. And then what she did, she got her son, I've got one brother, and she got him to translate it into Bengali just to reconfirm what I had said. And then she was happy. And so my sisters, the youngest one, said, "Did you write about me? Did you write about me? Did you write about my own hair story? Did you include me in there as well?" And so, yes, my family's reaction was very supportive, really, really wonderful. And my father, who isn't here, the book is dedicated to my father, who passed away in 2009. And so, yes, that was the reaction from my family.
Thank you. Anita?
Yeah, I had long conversations with my mum before I even wrote it, because there's so much. I mean, if you're going to write a memoir, your mum's going to feature, and I had to, especially my mum, she gets it. It's just very frank and honest about our relationship. And so I had long conversations with her about it. And then she listened to the audiobook, and she wept and loved it so much that she's listened to it non-stop. I don't know whether that's because she just misses me. But she actually said, "I'm so glad you said these things, because you've spoken for me, and you've spoken for all those women who didn't have a voice." And she says, "I'm really proud of you." And she said, "I feel like you are taking me on a journey with you to teach me about, things." And she said she could have, I don't know, I don't want it to make her feel bad, but she does say, maybe I could have done things differently. I'm like, "No, Mum, you're amazing, don't worry." But yeah, and my cousins have read it, and one of them there's some of them feature, and they wrote to me to say, "Yeah, well done, talking about our history." And I'm estranged from a lot of my family. When you read it, you'll see that. And one of my cousins, who I've not spoken to in about 15 years, reached out to say, "Oh my God, let's be friends." I was like, "Fuck off." No, we are again friends.
Thank you so much. So there's a question back there. You had your hand up, didn't you?
Thanks. Hey, as someone who, I work in the media, and one of the things I really struggle with is I really want to tell that story of being an Asian woman in Britain, but then I want to tell other stories as well, and I don't want to be seen as the girl who's always talking about race. Like, I
Yes.
want to talk about politics, I want to talk about dating.
Yeah.
And I wonder how you bridge those two things, because I do think there is this problem where editors with the best intentions will be like, right, you're brown, you can talk to us about racism, but kind of disregard that you could talk about anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a problem. Well, basically, we're not seen for anything. We're not multidimensional. We're just this. We're just brown, and it's a big problem. And so I find that this is also an exercise in showing people many dimensions of who we are. And Asian kids rave too. Can you believe it or not? I met my husband at a warehouse party, and I remember telling the story once, and it was in the papers. Shocking way in which Anita Rani met her husband. I'm like, what? Because an Asian girl was at a party? Shocking. But you're right. The thing is, I find that in my experience is that the only way I have been able to create space for myself to tell other stories is by telling them that I want to tell those stories. But I was only able to do that once I'd done the stories about race. Once I'd become forced marriage correspondent, but also here's the dilemma, right? Of course, I want to tell all the stories, but if there is a South Asian story to tell, I want to tell it. You know, I want to tell the India stories, and I want to tell the other stories. I want to do it all. I would say we just got to keep fighting the good fight. Like, I'm on Women's Hour now. Women's Hour, woo! But I'm constantly saying, when we get guests on, can we not just have a guest who is not white talk about this as well? You know, let's get women of colour to talk about things that are not just about. Let's not just get people on to talk about the race story.
But also, like, a story about dating through the lens of a woman of colour will inevitably be completely different, and it will have that veneer of the lens through which you see it is always different.
Different completely, and it's really important to show that lens, because it's Britain. You know, it's okay. We can't just because yes.
No, definitely. It's called the burden of representation, and as a Asian woman, I've had that burden of representation, which means that when I'm asked to comment on British media, it's either race, religion, community, or faith. And I actually have a huge background on climate change. I write for the New Arab and the international magazines on inclusive climate change. And so then they realise, oh, okay, she actually talks about something else other than race, faith, and community. And so you have to make that space. And there was a television programme that rang me up and asked me to speak about faith, and I said, no, I'm going to speak about leaseholders and the charges that they face because the result of the fire safety scandal, because I campaign on that and I write about it. And she said, really? Do you really do that? And I said, yes, now get me on there. And I got myself on there. It was one of the controversial, the new TV channel, I won't say the name, and I got on there and I made sure that I put my way forward. And the producer then rang me up and said, you really do know about your stuff about leaseholders. You really do know about it. You know about the legislation. I said, yeah, you might want to consider giving opportunities, not just for me, but other women from Asian backgrounds, that opportunity for them to be able to give that perception. So you might be about leaseholders, but they will have a different perception. So value that perception.
And that's why you need people of colour, people from different backgrounds in positions of power who are making those editorial decisions, because they can see beyond the colour of your skin. I just sometimes think how little we have evolved as a race that we still can't see beyond the colour of someone's skin. That you choose to wear a hijab automatically puts you in, people's minds, and it's just baffling. It's really kind of, and we have to keep. So we got to keep writing the books. Yeah. Keep telling that story.
Great question, thank you, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Good luck.
There was a question here from, yes, person with the hand up.
Thank you so much, and so looking forward to reading both of your books. So thank you. Um, I'm writing a novel at the moment. It's about a queer Pakistani teenager growing up in Hounslow in very racist 1970s and 80s. And so my question is, how did you decide what of yourself to put into these books, those decisions? Like, for example, I might know a little bit about what my novel is about from my own experience. What did you decide? How did you decide what you put in there? You know, that is so personal to you. What do you expose? What do you bring to light? What do you keep for yourself?
Rabina?
Yeah, so you are the owner of your story. You are the owner, you are the person who can decide. For the first time, it was my story. I wasn't going to have a journalist write about me. It was me, and I could decide what to put in and what not to put in. And that doesn't mean you've written a story, and that's it. There'll be a part 2, part 3. And it was at this moment in my life, I thought this was the right time to write that story. And it was, you know, you decide that there's an age where you think, I'll write this bit at this time, and maybe in 5 years' time, I'll write a little bit more because you feel comfortable with it. And this is that moment. But one thing, remember, when you write a novel or a memoir, you are the writer. You're the person in charge. Your pen will tell you what you want to write, how you feel comfortable with, what you want to express, how you want to reach out to people. So don't, in some ways, don't underestimate yourself. If you want to put something in there that's sensitive, do it if it makes it feel good in yourself. But don't do it if it doesn't make yourself good. I put the things in there because it made me feel better. I wanted it, made me feel actually happier to put it in this book, and I wanted to share it with the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly that. You know, you decide there are things I haven't put in there to protect people and, you know, things I didn't want to share. But actually, there's a lot in there that I wasn't expecting to expose. I've put so much in there because actually I recognize this is my one opportunity to tell a story. And why not? Why not just put some of the really difficult stuff in there? Because that's the stuff that people will, I think, respond to. And if they realize that, you know, it wasn't that easy, that's the stuff that's really going to connect with people. And that's what I'm finding. And being that vulnerable was a new experience for me, but actually incredibly cathartic to put it on the page. So I've put quite a lot in there, more than I was expecting to. But also, it was like you say, I'm telling the story, and I really trusted my editor as well. We worked quite closely together, and there was a lot of trust between us. But I thought, the day before it came out, I was sick to my stomach with nerves because I thought, well, you just think no one's going to read it. What have I done? I've put all my shame on the page only to shame myself. Oh no. And actually, I spoke to a very good friend of mine who's a mentor, and he said, look, if I was talking to you now and you hadn't put that or any of that stuff in there, if you'd just written a really superficial story that didn't give that much away, how would you feel? And I thought, well, I think what a wasted opportunity. So for me, it was really important to talk about a lot of difficult things.
Guess what, guys? We've come to the end. But this is a very important thing. There is a bookstall at the bottom of the escalators where you can buy signed copies of both of their books and also my memoir, which I'm not really plugging because...
Which is brilliant, by the way. Brilliant.
But please go and buy their books. They are signed and they are brilliant. And, you know, we just need those sales, don't we? I have no other subtle way of saying
Christmas is coming.
We need those sales. Yes. Thank you so much to all of you for coming out. As I said, it is brilliant that thank you. I'm so grateful that the choice that you made was to spend time with us, and that makes me really happy. I'm so glad to be doing live stuff again. I'm excited to be in conversation with you in Cheltenham if you're going to Cheltenham in a couple of weeks. And both of your books are amazing. You need to go and buy them. So Rabina Khan's My Hair is Pink Under This Veil is out now, and so is The Right Sort of Girl. And you know what? Imagine this was the last act at Glastonbury 2021, 2021, and all of that euphoria that you've had from an amazing weekend, all of that, you know, that absolute joy and happiness that you've had seeing the best band that you've ever seen. Please give it up for Anita, Rani and Rabina Khan.
Thanks, Nikesh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was good. That was like Glastonbury.